They announced my name like the rest of them did, polite applause, a small cheer, the hollow sound a stadium makes when it's trying to feel sincere. But the first thing I remember is the heat, June's sun like an accusation, the polyester gown sticking to my spine, and a metallic tang of fear in my mouth that tasted a lot like adrenaline and the cheap lemonade from the tent. My diploma felt heavier than paper should. They called me Ava Carter. I walked. I smiled. I handed my gloved hand to the dean and shook his like I believed in a future I hadn't yet been allowed to touch. Then my grandmother showed up. Evelyn St. James moved like someone who refuses to be ignored. At 78 she had an ease that didn't require apology, silver hair pulled back in a wound of soft armor, a cream jacket that hummed, "This is not charity." She didn't sneak in, she arrived like a headline. She found me in the crowd and winked, something small and warlike, and that wink kept me afloat through the speeches and the shuffle and the lineup that blurred together until it was just faces and diplomas and the smell of cut grass that we found them after. My parents, in the family section pretending to be casual, arms tight where they meant not to be. Laura, my mother, had a dress that belonged to better lighting and better luck, and Daniel, my father, held himself like a man trying to remember where he'd hidden his conscience. We posed for pictures. We did the thing families do, smiles that arrange themselves for the camera while truths sink like stones behind them. Evelyn pulled me aside and asked the questions she always had. What's next? Where will you work? What are you going to do with that head of yours? Practical things, asked with the warmth of someone who'd spent her life making plans that didn't depend on luck. That I told her my rehearsed answers. 3 interviews, a shared apartment in Austin, a budget so tight it squeaked. I lied, technical, small, survivable lies. I didn't tell her about the rent I skipped, the midnight shifts, the loan notices with their polite threats. $842 in the bank sounded like the script I was supposed to follow. Then she said it like she was naming the weather. You have a trust, Ava. I set one up the day you were born. $3 million. Your parents were trustees until you turned 21. For a while the faces around us blurred and shut down like a theater going dark. The words landed and clanged. 3 million. My parents went pale slow, like someone had poured cold water under their skin. I asked them, and they answered like people trained in delay, legal complications, failed investments, taxes, fees, language soft as gauze and sharp as a knife. Evelyn didn't let them wrap anything in softness. She stood there under the sun and told them to bring every single paper, every signature, every statement, within 48 hours. She told me to come to dinner that night. She told them what any banker would tell embezzlers, be precise, or the truth will be. People glanced. Phones buzzed. I felt the world narrow until it was nothing but my own chest and the dry sound of betrayal. On the drive back to my apartment, my graduation gown folded like a cloak on the passenger seat, I watched the city as if I were seeing it in a new frequency. Everything I had accepted as normal started to look like a storyboard with keyframes missing. The car my father got through a program. The kitchen they said had been paid for on credit. The trip to Europe with no chaperone named responsibility. Every small lecture they'd given me about thrift suddenly echoed with cruelty. At home, an upstairs converted flat with thin walls and thrift store furniture, I sat on my futon and did what the degree had taught me to do. I started tracing. Trust law, trustee duties, fiduciary negligence. Phrases grew into outlines, outlines into a plan. The numbers didn't feel like fantasy anymore. 3 million became lists of withdrawals, vague descriptors, consulting fees, business opportunities, little paper ghosts where real answers should be. It wasn't just money. It was time, choices, internships I had refused because we can't afford it, the interviews I couldn't fly to, the months I didn't sleep trying to make rent. It was a theft with receipts and polite handwriting. Anger came hot and sharp. It wasn't the kind of thing that wanted to explode at a party, it wanted a map. I wanted to hurt them in a way that mattered, to show them loss measured not in money but in truth. That night at Evelyn's house, her place on the hill that looked like a postcard at sunset, she laid out ledgers like a general deploying troops. Tie boxes went cold on the side. Her hands trembled when she poured me wine, but only barely. She'd been watching, she'd been testing, and she had the patience of a woman who'd built an empire from foundation up. We will get this back, she said. We will find every dollar. But we need to be smart. And we were smart. We traced, subpoenaed, made lists. We found transfers to businesses with names that meant nothing and to family accounts with names that meant everything. We learned the small cruelty of people who ate dessert while telling their child there was no money left for milk. For weeks it felt like work, methodical, surgical. But underneath the spreadsheets and subpoenas something else was happening. I found out who I had been when I wasn't being told the version I was supposed to be. The girl who accepted handouts because she didn't believe she deserved down payment money. The girl who folded her aspirations small enough to fit in an envelope. The discovery was violent and tender both, and here's the thing I have to tell you, because the part of this story that would make it a neat morality play isn't the part everyone wants to hear. They expect a courtroom, a public humiliation, a final scene of vindication. They expect me to stand in a courtroom and make the gavel fall like an exclamation point. That could have happened. We had evidence. We had the numbers. But I didn't go to the courthouse to make their shame official. I did something smaller and, to them, much sharper. On the morning after the first pile of papers were signed in Evelyn's study, quiet signatures, not yet public, Evelyn slid an envelope across to me. Inside was a single sheet and a small key. The sheet said only, "To be opened if you ever doubt who you are." The key was ordinary, heavy, warm. It fit into no lock I had and fit into my palm like a promise. That afternoon I opened a bank account, just a small, ordinary account, with Evelyn's help. I wired a single, modest amount from a previously unknown corner of my grandmother's holdings, enough to pay off the worst of my loans, enough to cover the first month of my prestige internship, not enough to be a headline. Enough for oxygen, then, because I had been given textbooks and textbooks had given me skill. I used those skills. I negotiated. I sent the right letters to the right people at the right time. I learned the names of the banks that had been used as passes and the little loopholes my parents had thought were clever. We built leverage quietly. We didn't drag them across the internet. We gave them a chance to be honest. They didn't take it, but here's the final thing. The twist I didn't see coming even after every spreadsheet was aligned. When I sat across from them at Evelyn's table, the old kitchen lights humming like a ceiling fan of judgments, I had every intention of making them pay for what they'd done. I had rehearsed the points: breaches of fiduciary duty, conversion of funds, the case law that made, it was for the family, a poor defense. I'd learned to take numbers and turn them into a language harder than shouting. They looked at me as if they had been caught in a mirror. I told them the facts. I watched their faces crumble. I felt vindicated and exhausted, bright with the fever of triumph, and then my grandmother, Evelyn, with the ledger lines around her mouth, did the thing that turned my plan into something different. She closed the book we had been using and looked at me slowly. "Ava," she said, "you are not served by revenge. You're served by power that doesn't need to shout. You are smarter than spending your life making a courtroom your stage." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, legal packet. "This," she said, "I signed in trust for you years ago. If you choose to take it and build, do it. If you choose to hold them accountable in court, do it. But know this, I have been watching long enough to know the difference between a life made and a life performed." I felt something inside me shift, like an old sculpture unsettled. The hot hunger for revenge cooled into something lonelier and stranger, proof that I could stand without the money and that, more terrifyingly, I might not need to make them suffer for me to behold us. So what did I do? I chose both restraint and motion. I used what Evelyn let me use, enough to clear the worst debts and buy the first flights to interviews. I kept fighting, for paperwork, for restitution, for acknowledgement. But I stopped asking my life to hinge on their punishment. I built a small, stubborn life that was mine, unpaid internships that I could now afford, wardrobe pieces I didn't have to pretend about, rent paid on time for the first time in years. The greatest twist, for me, wasn't that the money existed or that my parents betrayed me. The twist was discovering my own agency inside the chaos, the skill to translate anger into work, the stubbornness to ask for the documents and read them, the capacity to choose a future that wasn't a monument to their mistakes. That key? I keep it in my wallet. Not because it opens anything now, but because it reminds me of the day I stopped letting someone else's choices write my script. So here is where I stop talking and ask you, because I want to know if I'm alone in this, if you found out.